All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about academic writing in this workshop. Kind of the idea is my mind on paper, so getting our ideas about either our Lister research or other areas of research that we're interested in onto paper, and how we can do them in a more kind of academic writing style. This is not kind of a one-stop shop for everything involving academic writing. I've got about 20 minutes, so we're going to hit the highlights today, and just try to get kind of a basis for everyone to get you started. So on that note, a little bit about some basics for academic writing. So when we talk about academic writing, we want to avoid things like contraction. So we want to spell out cannot instead of can't, would not instead of wouldn't. We also want to use more formal lexis, and we're meaning with that more formal vocabulary. So instead of saying there's loads of data, which might be a bit more colloquial, we'd say there is substantial evidence. So using that as well. We try to avoid unnecessary punctuation. With that, sometimes when we write text, we'll put a bunch of ... If you're familiar with Mamma Mia, they have the song at the beginning and they're talking about her diary where such and such happened and ... We want to actually fill in the ... So we want to avoid unnecessary punctuation, such as hyphens, brackets, slashes, and ellipses. So that's something to think about as well. We want to avoid abbreviations, so spelling out as soon as possible rather than writing ASAP. Things like that. We want to also avoid using etc. So list it out, be clear in what we're saying. And we also want to use more formal and powerful reporting verbs. What we mean by that is reporting verbs tell us, they're verbs that are used to discuss or provide an account of someone else's work or their claims. And they're much more powerful than just saying said. So when we say said, we don't really have 100% as clear of a picture of what is actually being meant. But when we say claimed, we know that they're making a claim. If we say they described something, then we know they're describing potentially a process or an event. So we want to use those stronger verbs as well. Continuing on with some writing basics. We also want to avoid use of personal pronouns, so I, me, you, we, that sort of thing. So instead of saying I think or I feel, we want to use the specific kind of more general phrasing. So instead of saying like my topic is about, we'd say something like this paper addresses or this paper describes or this article describes, rather than using personal pronouns. The focus of that paper, that article is not on us, it's about the content. So we want to take the spotlight off of ourselves. We also want to avoid adding personal commentary in academic writing that goes into avoiding personal pronouns. So when we talk about personal adverbs, in this case, we mean surprisingly, fortunately, beautifully, innocently, perfectly, thankfully. So we want to avoid adding kind of these extra personal emotive adverbs in there. We also want to make sure we're using accurate vocabulary. So thinking about the difference between rule or law, do you mean a rule or do you mean something that's being enforced by law, so by a group, by a society, by a government? Also thinking about emigrate versus immigrate. Another triple word combo that we think of is assure versus ensure versus insure. So making sure we're using that accurate vocabulary so our readers know what we're talking about. And lastly, we also want to avoid phrasal verbs. The idea of a phrasal verb is it's a verb plus generally a preposition or another article that has a specific meaning. We use them quite often in spoken English. So for example, going up when we mean increase. So prices are going up at the moment instead of saying prices are increasing, or saying I'm going up the stairs rather than saying I'm ascending the stairs. We also use it with think about when we mean consider. So you should think about the consequences rather than consider the consequences. So in that case, we'd rather use consider. It's a stronger verb. We know what's being meant with that. Also, when we use, for example, going up, which meaning are we wanting to use? So when we avoid phrasal verbs, we're using then verbs that are much more concrete in their meaning, and our audience knows what exactly we're referring to. A little bit about some general formatting and citations. So we'll talk a little bit about how do we format academic writing, and citations, and why we use citations. Going off of that, so for general formatting, a general essay, article, paper will have 3 parts: an introduction, a body paragraphs, and then conclusion. You can see here on the right, I've got a diagram. So the yellow section is the introduction, the green is the conclusion, and the gray in the middle is body paragraphs. With the introduction, the reason we have an introduction is to introduce our topic to our audience. So we want to bring them in. We want our reader to want to read further into our document. Conclusion summarizes, it concludes what we're talking about, it ends it for us, and we use our body paragraphs to elaborate on our topic. If we're trying to persuade something, then we use that opportunity to present evidence, to present support for what we claimed in our introduction. General formatting, quite often you'll see 5 paragraphs. That's something that is quite often taught, but there's no limit on how many paragraphs you can have. We just want to format them in a way that's legible and easy to read. That's a bit with the consistent paragraph division. We want our audience to be able to know and understand what we are saying, so we do that by using paragraphs. One way to think of that is one idea to one paragraph. So you talk about one idea in one paragraph, and that makes it easier for your reader to go through your ideas. Another thing with that is a sentence is not a paragraph. So a paragraph is made up of multiple sentences. So we want to make sure that when we are writing, when we're making a paragraph, we use multiple sentences. So, moving on to the next slide a bit, kind of moving into citations. So why are citations so important, and why do we want to use citations? So citations let the reader know where the information was found. So citations allow us to see where you have certain support in your argument from. They also allow for fact checking and for verification of the information. So if you claim something in your essay, when you have a citation from another author, from another source, the person reading can say, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me go look at that. And they can then find that source that you got the information and read it for themselves. They're also important because they give credit to the person who first created an idea or concept, and recognize someone else's work and research. We want to give credit where credit is due. We want to make sure people are honored and recognized for their hard work, for their dedication, for their research. So we want to make sure that we give them that opportunity. Yeah, as Marlene just said, citations are the difference between properly supporting your argument with proper sources and the classic trust me bro source. So citations let us know that this has been thought out by other individuals, that there's support behind it, that it's not just someone in some random corner of the internet saying, I tried this once, trust me. Another important part with citations is it helps avoid plagiarism. We want to make sure that people get credit for their ideas and they get credit where credit is due. And we don't want to steal or cheat someone out of their hard work. If someone else spent years and years of research on something, we want to make sure they are honored for that work. So when we cite, we make sure that we give credit to other people for their ideas rather than saying that this is my idea when it's not. A little bit about types of quotes that you might see for citations. So we have 2 types that you often see. We have a direct quote and an indirect quote. When we say direct quote, we mean something that is word for word copied from another source. So for example, if I pull up from Ann Lister's diary a quote from 17th of January in some year, and I just copy and paste it out and put it in, that is a direct quote. I have not changed what she originally wrote. It is her words as she originally wrote them. That would be a direct quote. Indirect quote is also known as paraphrasing. And when we're doing that, we put someone else's ideas into our own words. So that would be, you read a couple of pages of Anne's diary and then kind of summarize them into an idea, and summarize what occurred on those pages. Both of these styles of quotes require citations. That's something that we want to think about and remember, is that it doesn't matter if it's in your own words. If you took the idea from someone else or it's someone else's work, we still need to give them credit for originally writing that and for it originally being their idea. So some examples of citations here that you can see. These are not the only types of citations that you can see in the world. These are just three that I pulled off that you see quite often. MLA is quite known for literature, English, things like that. APA, oftentimes you see with some science publications. It's from the American Psychological Association. And then we have Chicago, which is often seen with law. They're each a little bit different in what they focus on. I won't go into every detail about those citation styles. I'll list in the chat after I finish some links if you're interested in learning a bit more and looking on your own. But with MLA, we can see here it's a paraphrase because it's not in direct quotes. If it's a direct quote, we would put quotation marks around it. We have here Robertson continued the research project for another 10 years and Jacobs 34. So that tells us the author's last name is Jacobs and that we can find it on page 34. So for example, if you're reading this in a document, you can then go to the bibliography or the works cited at the end of the document and find this full written out bibliography, works cited citation, which would have the author's name, the title of the work, the page numbers, the publisher, all of that. And you can find then that work for yourself and look up that information later if you wish. APA is a bit different. So APA here, this one would be another paraphrase, again, not a direct quote because we don't see quotation marks. So Hernandez's book contradicted and challenged Smith's established claims. And then we have Morris 2005, page 348. So you can see here APA does it a bit differently. So APA generally does last name, year, page number. So it's a bit different than how MLA does it. Each one of them has their own style within that and kind of what they focus on specifically. These are examples of in-text citation. So this is something that you would see in the free-flowing text of a document, whereas Chicago, for example, uses footnotes. When we say footnotes, that's where if you've ever read a book or an article and you'll see a word and then in superscript at the top, you'll see a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And then at the bottom of the page or at the foot of the page, you'll see a note with a similar citation or with further information. That would be a footnote. Chicago does that instead. So that's a bit of a difference between those citation styles there. There's more citation styles. These are three that I've constantly worked with and that you see quite often in English. Different languages use also different citation styles. So that's something to keep in mind. Citation styles also go further than just quotations. They also sometimes will go into how you format a paper or a document. So how you do table of contents, how you do page numbering, how you do titling, things like that. So if you're interested in that, you may want to actually go to these individual websites and learn a bit more about those. If you're looking to present a paper to a journal or to another academic source or publish, you may want to ask that publisher or that journal first what type of citation style they use before you write, just so that way then you're not having to reformat all of your citations later. So that's something that is also potentially something to consider. So that being said, again, it was short, sweet, and to the point. So just a little bit about academic writing, just to give you a bit of a taste. If you have any questions, my email is there. I also have a Twitter, so please feel free to contact me there. That being said, the basis for this talk and the quote that came from it is one from Anne Lister from the 22nd of June in 1821. Where she says, "I owe a good deal to this journal. By unburdening my mind on paper, I feel as it were, in some degree, to get rid of it. It seems made over to a friend that hears it patiently, keeps it faithfully, and by never forgetting anything, is always ready to compare the past and present and thus to cheer and edify the future. So our hope is that when you do publish works and you do use academic writing, you're doing your own bit to compare the past and the present and to cheer us into the future and expand our knowledge of the topic you choose to research. And you can see here also an example of an in-text citation from MLA style. So we have Whitbread and then 171. So thank you for your time. We've got a little bit of time for Q&A. So we'll go ahead and move into that. If you want to raise your hand, feel free. I'll also take a look at the chat. And Alex has posted in here, if you want to save time on citations, there's an online reference generator. So those are also available if you don't want to have to do it yourself. And so I'll start looking through this. Suzanne asked, sorry, is Uni Bonn in Germany? Yes, so I'm based out of Bonn, Germany. I work for the University of Bonn in their language practice, so I teach academic writing. I also teach courses regarding US politics, history, law, things like that. So preference re footnotes or endnotes depends on the style you're using and what you want to use. So some people, if they're using in-text citations, will then use more endnotes, but that depends as well. Alex's question, what kinds of ideas do not need to be cited? When is something just known? We say general information doesn't have to be cited, so you wouldn't need to cite the sky is blue. We generally understand that the sky is blue. That sort of general knowledge, but especially when we use statistics and do analysis. So if you find a statistic, so 1 in 4 doctors think that XYZ, we'd want to use a citation so we know, okay, well, who did that study, who found that information, that sort of things, to be able to exactly trace that line of thought. So, Catherine asked, is it okay to use ... in a quote when not including relevant clauses? That's a great question. So yeah, we do use an ellipses in a quote if we're excluding information. So that is a mark to the reader that I'm including this section of a quote, I've excluded a section, and then I've added another, and then I'm including a section afterwards. The important thing when we use ellipses or the 3 dots in a quote is it should not change the meaning of the quote. So we don't want to alter the original author's purpose. So we want to make sure that if we do use ellipses, if we are excluding information, we're still keeping the original meaning intact. So that's one thing to think about with those. Okay, we have another question. What would you say to someone who is reluctant to get into paper writing because they think they're not academic enough? I would say we all started somewhere. So nobody is born an expert. No one is born a writer. It's something that's taught. Writing involves a lot of practice. We can always improve. We're always improving. Even with citation styles, they change. So we have updated versions. I think APA is now on version 7. So even citation styles change. So if we're changing how we cite things to improve them, to make it clearer, we also are improving. So I think that it's open to anyone. I think that's something that we need to really kind of talk about a little bit more in academia, is about access and open access, and seeing that everyone has the opportunity for research. Everyone should have that opportunity as well, but also having the conversations about access to learning these skills. So I don't think anyone is not academic enough. It's just about learning together and asking questions and being curious. So. All right, so we have here, what style of writing would need citations? Would a fiction? Depending on what you're writing. So if you're writing a fictional novel, let's think, for example, kind of like the Hunger Games. You don't see citations in the Hunger Games as a novel because it's not citing someone's particularly, so it's not repeating someone else's claims. When we were talking about using citations, we're talking a lot of times about academic texts, nonfiction, research type of texts. So if you go, for example, on the Pact with Potential website and you see a lot of their articles, you'll see citations to other sources or reference to other sources because they found information about Ann Lister, her friends, her companions, her family in other sources, and they want to make sure that other individuals can find that information. So hopefully that answers kind of that question a little bit more. Okay. I want to make sure I post these in here quickly. I'll see if then another question pops up or not. I'll post in there some links to some guides on different citation styles. So there's one for MLA, there's one for APA, and there's also one for Chicago. Each one of these different citation styles has its own organization, and they actually every once in a while create a book that you can read, or a lot of times universities or academic institutions will create a summary and kind of explain the intricacies. This is one that I quite like to use. It's OWL by Purdue University in the United States. And so there's one for MLA style guide, how they do their citations. They also have one on APA, and then Chicago Manual of Style actually does their own. So there's also a link to Chicago. So any final questions, comments? If not, it's been a pleasure to spend the morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. And thanks for coming. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. And I can't wait to see what research you all produce in the coming weeks, months, and years. So take care.